What happens when a professor tries to publicly humiliate a quiet student, completely unaware that she's challenging none other than Keanu Reeves? What started as an attempt to embarrass him quickly turned into a lesson no one at that university would ever forget. And by the time this story ends, you'll see Keanu Reeves in a way you'd never expected. Oh, and before we continue, who are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. We'd love reading. The sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the grand neoclassical building, casting long shadows across the polished floors. It was the first day of the semester at Hartsfield University, an institution steeped in tradition where the walls whispered the legacies of brilliant minds long gone. Students from across the country navigated the halls, adjusting to the fast-paced environment, the unfamiliar faces, and the overwhelming pressure to keep up with the university's ruthless academic standard. In room 204, inside the Department of Pure Mathematics, students trickled in, their hushed murmurs mixing with nervous laughter. At the front of the room, scrawled in crisp white chalk across the blackboard, was a name that commanded both respect and fear. Dr. Eleanor Voss. She was known for her intellect, sharp as a scalpel, and her absolute intolerance for mediocrity. To her, a classroom wasn't a place of comfort. It was a battlefield, and only the most capable would survive. Mistakes were not overlooked. Praise was never handed out lightly. Then quietly, the door opened. No one paid much attention at first. A man slipped inside, moving with effortless grace, drawing no attention to himself. He wore dark jeans, a plain black shirt, and carried a thick, well-worn notebook. His sunglasses, which he removed slowly, revealed eyes filled with quiet focus. It was Keanu Reeves. A few students recognized him. Some exchanged glances, surprised but respectful. There were no excited whispers, no frenzied reactions, just silent curiosity. What was he doing here? Was this for a role? A documentary? A secret project? But beyond all that, one question stood out. Why did he look so genuinely interested? Before anyone could speculate further, bam! The door slammed shut, firm and final. Dr. Eleanor Voss entered, moving like a general stepping onto the battlefield. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, her posture impeccable. The rhythmic click of her heels against the wooden floor was the only sound in the room as she strode to the front and turned to face them. For a moment, she simply stared. Her sharp eyes scanned the room like a predator assessing its prey. Then at last she spoke. Welcome to reality. Her voice was cool, commanding, absolute. This is advanced calculus. There is no room here for excuses, for intellectual laziness, or for empty arrogance. A heavy silence settled over the room. She continued, her gaze piercing through the students. At this university, meritocracy is the only thing that matters. I don't care if your father is a billionaire, if you barely scrape by in a public school, or if you have millions of followers online. The only thing that counts here is whether your mind can handle the work. She paused, her eyes locking onto a student in the front row, who quickly looked away. Or what you're about to learn. In the back row, Keanu sat motionless. No reaction, no shifting in his seat, just calm, unwavering attention. He wasn't defiant, he was simply absorbing. Dr. Voss took a step forward, her voice dropping slightly. Some of you think fame can replace effort, she said, her words like a blade slicing through the room. This time she let her gaze flick toward the back, just for a second, that the glow of cameras makes up for the lack of discipline. Provocation was clear, the challenge deliberate. Keanu was clear. He simply turned the page of his notebook as if he'd heard it all before from different voices in different lifetimes. The lecture moved forward, formulas and equations filling the board, but the atmosphere had shifted. This wasn't just about calculus anymore. It was a silent war, a battle of authority, a presence of unspoken brilliance. And by the time the class ended, it was clear something had begun. Keanu remained seated as the others gathered their things. He finished writing in his notebook, closed it carefully, and stood up. As he made his way to the door, something happened. Dr. Voss looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Their eyes met, two worlds colliding. She, the embodiment of control. He, the quiet mystery. And what no one in that room knew Not yet. Was that the man sitting in the back was about to change everything? Not just that class, not just the university, but the very idea of what true knowledge looks like. That mathematics doesn't care how adored you are outside these walls. Dr. Voss hadn't said his name. She didn't need to. Then something unexpected happened. A hand rose in the back of the room. Keanu, calm, polite, almost reluctant. The air in the classroom went still. Dr. Voss turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. Yes. He hesitated just a second before speaking, his voice measured, clear, and softer than expected. I was just wondering why we're avoiding the actual content of the class. A pause. You said this course was about understanding mathematics, not ideology. The room collectively held its breath. A challenge, not loud, not aggressive, just a simple, direct question. Dr. Voss smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the kind of smile a predator gives right before the kill. And what exactly qualifies you to question how I conduct my class, Mr. Reeves? She tilted her head slightly. Your resume in Hollywood? Your experience dodging bullets in slow motion? A few students chuckled nervously. Some lowered their eyes, sensing the sharp edge of the moment. But Keanu didn't flinch. No, not that. His voice remained steady, untouched by provocation. I just believe mathematics isn't about opinion. It's a tool to describe the world as it is, to decode patterns we don't even realize are there. Something shifted. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Precise, like someone used to silence but whose words carried weight when spoken. A student near the front whispered, almost to herself, that didn't sound like an actor. Dr. Voss didn't move, didn't blink. Interesting, she said, voice perfectly flat. But mathematics is more than pretty words, Mr. Reeves. Keanu nodded once. Agreed silence. Not an awkward silence, but something charged, something on the edge of meaning. For the first time in a long while, Dr. Voss had been challenged. Not by arrogance, not by bravado, but by calm, unshakable reason, and she felt it. She cleared her throat, turning back to the board. Let's get back to it, she said. But something in her tone had changed. It was colder, sharper, not because of what he had said, but because of how unaffected he remained. She flew through equations, faster than usual, her voice clipped and deliberate. Most students struggled to keep up. Some gave up, overwhelmed, notebooks half filled with frantic scribbles. Keanu, however, stayed silent. His notebook, unlike the others, wasn't filled with just... It was filled with ideas, derivations, marginal notes exploring alternative paths she hadn't even mentioned yet. When the bell rang, the air was thick with something unspoken. Dr. Voss gathered her things quickly, but before she left, she turned back. Some people believe silence is a virtue, she said, her eyes locked onto Keanu's. That staying quiet makes you wise. But sometimes silence is just the mask of ignorance. For the first time, something flickered in Keanu's expression. Not anger, not offense, something deeper. A quiet warning. The next class, by the time the next lecture rolled around, the energy in the room had changed. This wasn't just a math class anymore. It was a spectacle, one unfolding in ways no one had expected. Students arrived early again, but this time, the glances toward the back of the room weren't about fame anymore. They were about curiosity, about a challenge, unspoken but unmistakable. Keanu entered just before the hour, quiet as always. Same seat, same black notebook. But this time, Dr. Eleanor Voss was already there, standing by the chalkboard, arms crossed. She didn't greet the class, didn't ask them to open their books. Instead, she turned to the board and began writing. Not words. Numbers, symbols, functions, fractions, notations that spiraled outward like a web, dense, complex, intimidating. By the time she stepped back, the entire blackboard was covered in a monstrous equation. It wasn't from any textbook. Some students exchanged nervous glances. A few tried to transcribe it into their notes, but quickly got lost. Keanu? He simply watched, hands resting on the table. Eyes steady. Dr. Voss turned, voice cold and surgical. This is the type of problem that separates mathematicians from hobbyists. She let the weight of the statement settle. It's not in your books, not in your lectures, not even in your exam prep guides. Then she turned to the class, but her gaze landed squarely on him. So tell me, would anyone like to try? Silence. She let the moment stretch. No one, she sighed. How disappointing. Then, like a chess master revealing her final trap, she added, Mr. Reeves, perhaps you'd like to take a shot, since you seem to have such insight. The room stopped breathing. A few students turned in their seats to look at him, almost instinctively. Keanu didn't react at first. He simply studied the board. Then slowly he closed his notebook and stood up. A quiet ripple of shock passed through the room. A gasp, a whisper, he's actually going. But Keanu didn't acknowledge the murmurs. He just walked. Dramatic, not hesitant, just inevitable. When he reached the board, he didn't touch the chalk immediately. He just looked, reading, tracing the logic, following the invisible threads buried beneath the surface. Dr. Voss stepped back, arms still crossed, watching, waiting for him to stumble, to freeze, to fail. But Keanu remained still. Then after a moment, he picked up a piece of chalk, turned it between his fingers, and began, not in the middle of the equation, at the corner of the board. Slow, precise. This looks like a nested limit problem, he murmured. Not bragging, not performing. Just thinking aloud, disguised with a differential topology twist. Some students leaned in. He wrote, step by step. Not guessing, understanding. You've built a false contradiction into the structure, he said, circling a section. If you isolate this inner term and treat it as a converging function rather than a discrete value, line by line, unraveling the impossible. And as the pieces fell into place, the room began to realize he wasn't just solving the equation. He was rewriting the rules of the game. And Dr. Voss? For the first time, she didn't have a single word to say. Dr. Eleanor Voss entered precisely on time. Impeccable posture, controlled expression, but something in her eyes was at war. She placed her materials down with her usual efficiency, but the silence in the room wasn't the kind she commanded. It was the kind that preceded something inevitable. Keanu Reeves sat in the back, as always. Notebook open, calm posture, but this time the eyes were on him, not for who he was, for what he had done. Dr. Voss turned to the board and began writing. Her chalk strokes were sharper than usual, more forceful. Today's topic is divergence and curl. Her voice was steady, but there was something clipped about it. These are fundamental to vector calculus used in physics, engineering, and differential geometry. If you misunderstand them, you misunderstand the very structure of motion itself. She continued writing, definitions, symbols, operators, her pace relentless. Students scrambled to keep up. Keanu, however, simply watched, not challenging, not resisting, just waiting. Dr. Voss turned, scanning the class. Then, as if it were inevitable, her gaze landed on him. Mr. Reeves, a slight murmur. Since you seem to have a gift for explaining, perhaps you'd like to clarify the physical interpretation of curl. Another test, another invitation, another invitation. But this time, something was different. Keanu didn't hesitate, didn't pause. He closed his notebook, rose from his seat, and walked to the front with the quiet confidence of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. He picked up the chalk. Think of curl as the fingerprint of rotation, he began. His voice was smooth, unhurried, but precise. He sketched a simple fluid flow on the board. Imagine you're floating on a river. If the water moves at the same speed everywhere, you'll drift along without spinning. But if one side moves faster than the other, he drew small arrows, shifting directions, building intuition before equations. You start to turn. That's curl. It tells you not just where motion exists, but where motion twists. A pause. Then he continued, seamlessly bridging theory with reality. It's why tornadoes form, why hurricanes spin, why galaxies spiral. The class was silent. No one was taking notes anymore. They were listening. Dr. Voss was standing completely still. Keanu didn't look at her. He was speaking to the students. Mathematics isn't about memorizing formulas, he continued, tapping the board lightly. It's about understanding the forces shaping our world. It's about seeing. A quiet voice from the side. I think I actually get it now. Keanu turned. It was the same soft-spoken girl who had spoken before. He smiled. That's what matters. A few students exhaled as if they had been holding their breath, and then scattered applause. Not loud, not theatrical. Just real. Keanu handed the chalk back to Dr. Voss. For a moment she didn't move. Then mechanically she took it, and without a word, began erasing. The dust fell in uneven strokes, but it didn't matter. The lesson had already been written somewhere else, somewhere permanent. Keanu returned to his seat, but everyone in that room knew he had never really left the front of it. Dr. Voss resumed the lecture, her words measured but quicker than before. Students, however, glanced toward the back more than the board. By the time class ended, the shift was undeniable. A girl hesitated before approaching Keanu. "Do you tutor?" He blinked, as if the question surprised him. Then after a second, he nodded. "After class works, I'll stay if anyone needs help." A pause. Then another student joined. Then another, and another. A group began to form, not around celebrity, but around something far rarer, someone who made them feel capable, someone who made them feel seen. And Keanu, he didn't do it to prove a point. Didn't do it to win. He did it because the numbers, the logic, the unseen beauty beneath it all, had always been his. And now quietly, impossibly, it was becoming theirs too. And Dr. Voss, she saw it happening. And for the first time, she realized she might not be able to stop it. Years passed. Room 204 became something more than just a lecture hall. It became a place where students walked in intimidated by numbers and left understanding something far greater: themselves. The shift that began with a single lesson didn't just change Dr. Voss.